Lara Girardi's life didn't begin that night when she arrived at the Portobello restaurant at 5:02 p.m., her hair hastily tied up, her shoulders tense, and her exhaustion hidden behind a practiced smile. Her life had truly begun months earlier, when she decided to flee everything she knew, taking only a backpack, a fake change of state certificate, and her 17-year-old autistic sister Julia, who couldn't stand loud noises and sometimes had meltdowns in the middle of the street. But on that particular night, the night that would divide the before and the after, she only wanted to finish her 13-hour shift, earn the meager dollars that would help pay for the room where they lived, and hope that Julia had managed to stay calm with the neighbor who looked after her when Lara was at work. The manager of the Portobello Hotel kept saying that emotional reserves don't pay the rent, and she pretended to agree. But the truth is that the whole world seemed designed to break people like Lara, women trying to survive while carrying other lives in their own hands. The restaurant was impeccable as always, with laser-aligned silverware, flawless white tablecloths, and the constant aroma of truffles wafting through the air. It was a favorite spot for Miami's silent elite, the kind of people who speak softly, but settle entire wars with a phone call. The owner, a mysterious man who rarely appeared, had left strict instructions for every detail to be perfect, and that included the staff, who needed to appear invisible, efficient, and always attentive. Lara took a deep breath, adjusting her apron, and tried to ignore the twinge in her right arm, exactly where the long, thin scar cut across her wrist. The scar she never explained to anyone, the scar that insisted on burning when something bad approached, even without wanting to believe it. There were nights when she felt as if her own body was trying to warn her of something she couldn't yet see. The movement began slowly, as it did every Wednesday, with discreet tables, elegant couples, men in suits conversing about investments and secrets that would never reach the newspapers. Lara served each one skillfully, moving with the lightness of someone who knows choreography by heart. But at precisely 7:14 p.m., everything changed. The darkened glass door opened, and 3 men entered with the silent confidence of those who control entire territories. Behind them, walking in the center, was the kind of presence that alters the atmosphere of any place. Tall, impeccable black suit, well-groomed beard, eyes that assessed everything without haste. Matteo Ravelli, head of one of the most influential families in South Florida. Lara had seen him from afar, in magazines that pretended not to know who he really was. In person, it was different. It wasn't just power, it was precision. It was like watching a predator enter a room full of prey and choose where to place its teeth. Matteo chose table 12, the most secluded table, the preferred one for men who didn't want to be overheard. Lara was automatically assigned to serve him because she was the only one who knew how to move among dangerous people without losing control. She approached with her practiced posture, feeling her stomach churn slightly, and presented the menu with the professionalism that other nights demanded of her. He looked up at her, and in that instant, before any words were spoken, something very strange happened. His gaze fell to her wrist, exactly where the scar appeared discreetly under the thin fabric of her sleeve. He froze. His mouth opened as if he had been punched invisibly. His breath faltered for an imperceptible second. She didn't understand anything, but she saw clearly that Matteo had recognized something. Not just seen, recognized, like someone finding a ghost they'd been searching for years. She tried to follow protocol, asking about wine, but he slowly raised his hand, as if silencing a crowd. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. His second-in-command discreetly approached, but Matteo couldn't take his eyes off her wrist. He was pale, not from fear, but from shock, a shock laden with fury and memory. It was then that he whispered, almost silently, "Where did you get that?" Lara didn't know how to answer. She didn't know if she should answer, and she didn't know how he could be talking about a scar she had always hidden, always avoided explaining, and about which no one should know anything. He stood up from the table so quickly that his water glass flickered. He turned to his men, and with an authority that split the restaurant in two, shouted, "Get out now!" And in a movement that seemed choreographed, everyone, customers, waiters, even chefs, was hastily removed by the armed staff who emerged from the side doors. In less than 40 seconds, Lara was there, locked in with Matteo and 2 silent security guards. The entire restaurant had been evacuated. The doors were closed, locked, and the automatic curtains descended, covering all the windows. Her hand trembled, the tray still clutched in her fingers, but her face betrayed it. She had learned to survive by hiding the cracks. Matteo approached slowly, as if trying to understand if what he saw was real. "That scar," he said, his voice too low to match the surrounding chaos. "It has the same cut, the same angle, the same depth. How?" He stopped. He took a deep breath. He ran his hand through his hair as if trying to stop his head from exploding. "Who did this to you?" Lara took a step back, instinctively, not because she was afraid of him, but because the memory of the cut, of the night it all happened, was there, throbbing, and because, for the first time, a dangerous man was looking at her, as if she were the missing piece of a puzzle he had been trying to assemble for years. Matteo ordered the security guards to leave, locking the main door behind them. Then he approached table 12 and pointed to the chair. "Sit down." He didn't ask. He didn't suggest. He ordered. But there was no hatred in his voice. There was contained desperation. Lara remained standing for a few seconds, trying to understand why this man, who could buy an entire building without blinking, was trembling just from looking at her wrist. She finally sat down, but kept her spine straight, like someone who knows she needs to control every inch of herself to avoid being devoured. Matteo sat down opposite her, leaning in to observe her closely. His eyes, dark and sharp, weren't looking for charm. They were looking for truth. "You don't know who I am," he said, "but I know who you can be." She frowned, trying to keep her feet firmly on the ground. "I'm just a waitress." He laughed, a humorless laugh. "There's no such thing as just, when you consider blood." The silence between them grew heavy, dense, almost physical. Matteo took a deep breath and ran his hands over his face. 22 years ago, he began. A child disappeared. An 8-year-old girl, taken from her family by people who wanted to attack our home. He looked at her wrist again. The girl fought. She scratched whoever was holding her. She received a deep cut trying to escape. His voice faltered for a second, and then she vanished. Lara felt her body freeze. Her scar had been made when she was 8 years old. At that time, she only remembered screams, a woman carrying her away, and nights running along dirty roads, but she never knew the context. I never knew why. He always believed it had just been a broken family. Matteo, however, spoke as if he had just found a ghost he had been searching for half his life. "Tell me the name of the woman who raised you," he asked. She answered hesitantly, "Irene Girardi." He closed his eyes, clenching his jaw as if he'd been hit. "Girardi," he repeated. "She was a distant cousin of the Rossettis. I should have known." He slammed his hand on the table, but not in anger, in frustration. "She hid you from the whole world." Lara didn't know what to feel. Confusion, fear, anger, gratitude for the woman who raised her. Her entire life had been built on silences. Matteo continued. "The kidnapped child was my sister." Lara felt her legs go weak. The cut on her wrist was the only clue left. He breathed rapidly, as if trying to contain an earthquake inside. "We believed she had been killed, but now I'm looking at you." Lara recoiled in her chair, her hand instinctively covering her wrist. This couldn't be real. She couldn't be the sister of a Mafia boss. She couldn't be the weak link in an ancient war she didn't even know existed. Matteo noticed her reaction and softened his voice. "If this is true, you're not in danger. You are the danger." He didn't say it as a threat. He said it as a warning. "If anyone finds out you're alive, they'll try to use you against me. They'll try to drag you out of here like they did before." Lara blinked slowly, trying to comprehend what that meant. All her life, she had felt that something was out of place, something about her that didn't fit, something she couldn't even explain. Matteo, however, seemed to have just fitted the last piece of his own hell. He stood up from his chair, pacing nervously. "I need to confirm everything. I need to be sure. But from what I see," he pointed to her wrist. "From what I remember," he touched his own chest. "From what I feel now." He stopped. He stared at her intensely. "You might be the only person I would wage war for." Lara shivered. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't seduction. It was a man telling the most dangerous truth of his life. He pulled out his cell phone, gave quick orders in Italian, ordered the restaurant locked for the rest of the night, and then looked at Lara again. "You're coming with me." Lara raised her hand instinctively. "And my sister? Julia can't be left alone." Matteo stopped. "Sister?" She nodded firmly. "She's special." He then called the security guard by name. "Marco, bring the girl." Lara's eyes widened. "Is she safe?" He nodded. "I already knew you had someone. I always check who's trespassing on my territory." When they got into the car, Lara felt the whole world shift. The driver started the engine, and Matteo sat down next to her in the back seat. He didn't say anything, but his body looked like a bomb about to explode. She took a deep breath, trying not to let anxiety take over. "What if this is all a mistake?" she asked, almost in a whisper. He looked at her slowly, as if listening to an impossible question. "If it's a mistake, you'll stay alive." He paused. "If it's true, then everything you know will change." His hand landed on the back of the seat, but didn't touch her. "And I'll have to protect you from a world you should never have seen." The car sped through Miami like a silent missile. Lara looked out the window, trying to piece together fragments of memory. Night races, a hand holding hers, a road, blood, a scar, a woman's voice saying, "Don't look back." With each memory that surfaced, she felt something inside her awaken, something that had been buried for years. When they finally reached the gates of the Ravelli mansion, Lara understood that the night wouldn't end there. Matteo ordered the gates opened, and the security guards conducted a thorough sweep before letting them in. The mansion was immense, elegant, and carried the silent grandeur that only houses with a true history possess. It wasn't ostentatious luxury. It was ancient power, deep roots, walls that had witnessed family wars that no one outside that circle could imagine. Julia was sitting on the sofa in the main room, watching one of the employees arrange a tray of fruit. As soon as she saw Lara, she ran to hug her. Matteo watched the scene attentively, perhaps trying to understand the bond between the two. "She gets nervous with loud noises," Lara explained, smoothing her sister's hair. "She doesn't like changes." Matteo nodded. "No one will scream here." And for the first time since that chaos began, he said something that sounded like a promise. Not a threat, not power, a promise. He then called a doctor from the house to examine her scar. The doctor looked at it, analyzed the pattern of the cut, and shook his head slowly. "It's the same type of blade used in the northern camp, 20 years ago." Matteo closed his eyes, exhausted. "I knew it." Lara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "If I am who you think I am, why didn't Irene ever tell me?" Matteo approached slowly. Because she knew that if you came back, you would bring war." His voice carried old pain, not accusation. "And because she tried to save you from me, from my family, from what we were." Lara felt something warm rise in her chest. It wasn't anger. It was loss. It was grief for a lifetime built on secrets. Matteo then leaned in and said firmly, "But you came back, and now nothing will be able to take you away from here." She squeezed her arm, feeling her pulse throb. "What if I don't want to stay in this world?" Matteo took a deep breath. "Then I'll take you far away from it." She frowned. "You have that power," he replied, with disconcerting sincerity. "For you, yes." The sentence fell between them like a weight that changes destinies. Lara looked away, trying to understand what it meant. Matteo noticed the conflict and softened his posture. "Before anything else, I need to tell you the story of our family. I need to tell you what happened that night. And why you—" He swallowed hard. "Because you're the missing piece." Lara nodded slowly. She knew that, from that moment on, there was no turning back. Matteo gestured for her to follow him to the main office. The heavy doors closed behind them, muffling the sounds of the house. He pressed a button on the panel, activating a signal blocker. "No one can hear from here," he stated. She sat on the dark leather sofa, pulling Julia close, while Matteo paced back and forth, trying to find the right point to begin a narrative that could destroy, or rebuild, everything. "The scar," he said again, "is just the beginning." And that's how he began to open up the past, as if it were a wound that hadn't yet healed. "The girl kidnapped that night wasn't just my sister," Matteo began. "She was the key to a truce between two families who had hated each other for half a century." He sat down in front of her. "When they took you, the war started again. People died. Children were left without fathers. The entire piece of Miami crumbled." Lara felt a weight in her chest. She, a lost girl, had been the trigger for something enormous. He took a deep breath. "And now you show up alive, sitting in my office." She almost wanted to laugh, almost wanted to cry, almost wanted to run away. Matteo noticed. "I'm not saying this to blame you. I'm saying it because I need you to know what you're getting into." Lara touched her wrist again. "And why now? Why me?" Matteo cupped her face in his hands. "Because someone discovered you exist." She felt the world spin. "What do you mean?" He walked to the window, extremely tense. "Today, before going into the restaurant, I received an anonymous message, a photo, of your wrist." He turned to her, grim. Someone wants to use you. Someone wants to reignite the war. And they sent you straight to me. Lara froze. I didn't do anything. Matteo shook his head. You don't need to. Just existing is enough. Julia, not understanding the weight of the conversation, fiddled with the curtain rod. Matteo crouched down beside her. I can protect you too, he said gently. Julia smiled and touched his face, as she does with people she considers safe. Lara felt her breath catch. Matteo observed her reaction and softened his gaze. I won't hurt you, she swallowed hard. But others will try. He didn't lie. Yes. Lara leaned back on the sofa, her pulse pounding. So, what happens now? Matteo approached and replied with the coldness of someone carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. Now, I declare war. The war didn't begin with gunshots that night. It began with a phrase whispered firmly inside the office. Now, I declare war. The word echoed in Lara's head as if it had physical weight, as if it could bring down walls just by the way he pronounced it. Julia was playing with a keychain on the coffee table, oblivious to the strategic earthquake that had just been triggered. Matteo was different. Not the man who ran a front restaurant, nor just the head of a criminal family. He was someone who had suddenly found something as precious as it was dangerous, and now he needed to reorganize the entire world so as not to lose it again. First thing, nobody out there can know you exist, he continued. Second, whoever sent the photo of your wrist didn't expect you to end up in my hands so quickly. That gives me a small advantage. Small, but real. Lara swallowed hard, feeling her wrist throb again, as if the scar were listening to every plan. The next few hours were a silent chaos. Matteo made quick calls, in languages Lara only half understood, but whose tone was universal. Maximum alert. Guards were repositioned, access to the mansion reduced, and the house's cell phones replaced with new devices. You and Julia will stay here. No going out, no work, no Portobello for now, he decreed, giving instructions to Clara, the housekeeper. Lara almost reacted immediately. I can't just disappear. My job, my rent, the neighbor who takes care of Julia, they'll think I've vanished. Matteo didn't blink. They will, yes, and that's exactly what I want. She opened her mouth to protest, but the truth is, if someone already had a photo of her wrist, her old life wasn't safe anyway. Still, the feeling of imprisonment rose along with the fear. It wasn't just protection, it was also control, and she hated feeling controlled. The following morning, as the sun had barely risen, a woman entered the living room with a thick binder in her arms, and a look that mixed efficiency and compassion. Lara, this is Chiara, Matteo introduced. She takes care of the part I can't do myself. Chiara was in her early 40s, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she had the air of someone who had seen the worst and decided to keep going anyway. I met your family before everything went wrong, she said, sitting down next to Lara on the sofa. I was at the table that night. Lara felt her stomach churn. The night of the kidnapping? Chiara nodded slowly. You were 8 years old. Your dress was stained with ice cream, and you were always running around the garden as if the world was just that backyard. She opened the binder, revealing newspaper clippings, old photos, reports. What they did to you was a message, and now they want to use the same scar as a signature for a second round. The difference is that, this time, you have someone on your side who knows how to read the game. Chiara spent the next few hours unraveling the story no one had ever told. She explained that the Ravelli family controlled routes and territories that, for decades, had been fought over with bloodshed between different groups. She recounted how the kidnapping of the girl with the cut wrist was planned to undermine a peace agreement that would have prevented much death. She revealed that Irene, the woman who raised Lara, had been paid to hide her in another state, and that initially the idea was to let the girl disappear forever. But someone inside changed their mind, Chiara added. She stopped sending reports, cut off contact, raised you as her daughter. Lara felt anger and gratitude mingling in a knot. Everything she knew, every small house, every hurried move, every poorly told story about staying away from dangerous people, suddenly took on contours she hadn't asked to see. Later, Matteo called Lara into his office. On the desk lay a dossier detailing her life in a way that made her nauseous. Childhood photos, addresses of the cities she'd lived in, hospital records, employment history. This isn't mine, he said, touching the paperwork. It's what others have on you. Lara felt the world darken at the edges. They tracked me all this time? He nodded, his jaw clenched. waiting for the right moment to use you. He pulled out a specific sheet, one with a picture of Portobello seen from the street. And when they realized you had approached my territory, they started moving the pieces. Lara wanted to break something. Anything. All these years I thought I was just an anonymous person trying to pay the bills. And all the while, she couldn't finish. Matteo completed it for her. A resource. A loose end. A tool of war. When the weight of the discovery began to overwhelm her, Lara left the office and instinctively sought the only place in the house that seemed not to be burdened with strategy, the guest room, which had been transformed into a sensory space for Julia. Her sister was there, sitting on the floor, organizing blocks by color, focused. "Are you okay?" Lara asked, approaching. Julia smiled, one of those rare smiles that lit up everything. "It's peaceful here," she replied, in a simple phrase that said a lot. The walls had acoustic panels, the lights were soft, and a specialized therapist, hired by Matteo, of course, discreetly guided some activity. It was strange to admit, but this was the best environment Julia had been in for years, and that hurt, because it meant that the safest place for her sister was precisely the house of someone who could order her killed with a nod. Outside that relatively tranquil bubble, the world had already begun to react. The day after the "Get out now" night, federal agents raided Portobello with warrants and questions. They interrogated employees, collected camera footage, and asked for the names of customers from the previous night. The manager called Lara in a panic, leaving messages she couldn't return. Matteo showed everything on the office monitor. "They're coming after you," he said, with the certainty of someone who knows the script before everyone else. It didn't take long. 2 days later, a black car pulled up in front of a seemingly random cafe, where Lara, at Chiara's insistence, had gone to meet a lawyer friend. She wasn't just a friend. She was someone aligned with the family. The agents appeared with badges and sharp questions. Why was the restaurant emptied so quickly? Who gave the order? Why were the doors locked? Lara felt sweat trickle down her back beneath her simple shirt. She knew that every word could put a bigger target on her. He also knew that telling the truth meant exposing Matteo, the man who had somehow already rearranged her life for better and worse at the same time. "It was standard security procedure," she replied, repeating the phrase Chiara had rehearsed with her. "A customer became ill, and we evacuated the room to avoid causing a commotion. The agents didn't buy it whole, but they took notes, insisting on details. One of them mentioned Matteo Ravelli's name with the calm of someone dropping a bomb in the room and pretending not to care. He was there, wasn't he?" Lara felt the scar throb. "I only wait tables," she replied curtly. "I don't go around checking customers' last names." When she left, her hands trembled, but the decision was made. She had chosen a side, even without admitting it aloud. When she told Matteo about the interrogation, she expected an explosion, a scolding, maybe even distrust. Instead, she found a man who seemed more relieved than angry. "You lied to the government for me," he observed, leaning against the table. "Do you understand what that means?" Lara crossed her arms defensively. "Does it mean I'm an idiot?" He shook his head, a tired half-smile appearing. "It means that, for the first time, someone did for me what I constantly do for others." He moved a little closer. "You might think it was just survival, but it was loyalty. And in this world, loyalty is worth more than blood." She looked away, not because she was embarrassed, but because she didn't know how to deal with the mixture of gratitude and danger in his tone. In the following days, the signs of impending war multiplied. 2 of Portobello's suppliers broke contracts at the last minute, citing external pressures. A car was seen circling the mansion at odd hours. One of the bars, used as a neutral point between groups, received a not-so-subtle message. Someone had drawn a cut on the wrist of a rag doll and hung it on the door. Matteo picked up the doll himself, his eyes dark as a storm. "They're using you as a signature," he growled. "They want me to know that you're the target." It was the first time Lara clearly understood that it wasn't just a dispute over territory or money. It was personal. It was a direct attempt to take from him the only thing he hadn't been able to protect in the past. And now they were trying again. One night, while the entire house was in a tense silence, a small explosion, calculated to frighten, not to kill, echoed near the north wall. Windows rattled, internal alarms went off, and Lara woke with her heart racing, unsure if this would be the night everything would collapse. Matteo entered her room unceremoniously, accompanied by 2 armed guards. "Get up, stay away from the windows," he ordered. He spoke quickly, in operational mode. Julia, sleepy, began waving her hands, irritated by the noise. Lara sat beside her, trying to calm her while they heard footsteps running outside, orders over the radio, the short breaths of people trained for war. The explosion hadn't caused serious damage, but the message was clear. They knew where to attack. They knew how to test the limits without crossing the point of no return. Yet, after the incident, Lara collapsed in the small, discreet chapel at the back of the house, a place that wasn't exactly religious for her, but a refuge of concrete and silence. Matteo found her there, sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. "If you want to leave, there's still time," he said, without fully entering. "I can put you on a plane, create a new identity, hide you somewhere where nobody even knows how to pronounce Ravelli." She gave a humorless laugh. "And you think that would work? The same guys who spent 22 years tracking me would just give up?" He shrugged, sincere. "Maybe not. Maybe you'd just exchange one kind of fear for another." Lara lifted her face, her eyes red but firm. "So the question isn't how to escape. It's how to avoid being swallowed up." Matteo stared at her for a few seconds, as if that sentence had hit a nerve he'd been trying to avoid for years. Chiara gradually became Lara's anchor in this labyrinth. It was she who explained, on a rainy late afternoon, that there was no clean way out for someone who had already been pulled into the center of an ancient war. "The difference," she said, distractedly stirring a coffee cup, "is whether you're going to be just an instrument or whether you're going to demand a voice." Lara frowned. "What voice can I have in a world that decided who I was before I was even born?" Chiara smiled slightly. "More than you imagine. You're not a henchman. You're not a soldier. You're not anyone's wife. You're the link that everyone tried to destroy and failed. That gives you power. Power is frightening. Power protects. And power demands something." Her honesty cut, but it also clarified. For the first time, someone spoke in a way that didn't infantilize Lara, or treat her like glass about to shatter. It was Chiara who also suggested that, instead of keeping Lara hidden as a shameful secret, Matteo should involve her in the clean parts of the family business. Restaurants, boutique hotels, logistics companies that operated within the law. If she just stays locked up here, she'll become a legend. And a legend is more valuable as a target, he argued. If she appears in public in a controlled way, as a partner, as the face of something legitimate, taking her out of the game becomes more expensive. Matteo considered this for hours, pacing the office like a caged animal. Finally, he called Lara. "You understand people. You understand reality. You understand tight finances. I want you with me in the part that starts over, not in the part that kills." She almost laughed. "Are you offering me a job in your empire?" He replied without glamour. "I'm offering you a way to not just be a trophy in this war." In the following months, Portovello reopened under a new structure. Officially, now a clean front company with a shareholding held by a certain Lara Gerardi Ravelli, the second surname discreetly added to documents that didn't circulate but existed where it mattered. To the public, she became the new executive manager, responsible for team training, customer experience, and menu revisions. Behind the scenes, it meant something else. Lara sat next to Matteo in meetings with suppliers, negotiated contracts, and refused extra fees that were previously charged automatically. In short, it was the first visible crack in the way the family did business. Some hated it, others respected it. Everyone noticed. War, however, isn't fought only with bullets. It's fought with messages. And the next message came in the form of an anonymous email, sent to one of the restaurant's official addresses. A photo of Julia at the door of the therapeutic school where Matteo had enrolled her, with a short message. "Nice new weakness of the house." Lara felt the ground open up when Chiara showed her the laptop screen. "They know where she studies," she whispered, feeling a paralyzing chill run down her spine. Matteo took the laptop from the table, read the message, closed his eyes for a second. When he spoke, his voice was icy. "Enough. They're using the fact that you're in the shadows. It's time to put you in the sun." Lara didn't understand. Chiara understood immediately. "Are you going to claim her?" Matteo nodded, his gaze hard. "In public. In front of them. If they lay a finger on her after that, it will be declared a direct attack on my family before the entire board." Lara almost recoiled. "You're talking about admitting I'm your sister to the same men who planned to kidnap me?" Matteo nodded. "The secret made you bait. The visibility makes you a cost." She took a deep breath. trying to calm her mind. "What if this only makes things worse?" he replied bluntly. "Then at least, let's make things worse with you by my side at the table, not trapped in some basement waiting for a ransom that might never come." His brutal honesty had the strange effect of making her more resilient. Choosing to face the danger head-on suddenly seemed less suffocating than continuing to be the invisible target of veiled messages. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Matteo stared at her like never before. "I need you to sit next to me and not look away. I'll take care of the rest." The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at a private club on the bay, neutral territory, but with enough history for anyone to think twice before breaking the rules. The oldest families sent representatives, men accustomed to deciding destinies at tables draped in expensive tablecloths. Lara arrived with Matteo, his face serene on the outside, his legs trembling on the inside. She wore something simple, elegant, nothing flashy, but which, next to his dark suit, created a contrast impossible to ignore. Julia stayed at the mansion, surrounded by more security than a head of state. When they entered the private room, the conversations fizzled out for a second. Matteo pulled out her chair, a small gesture that, in that context, meant a great deal. No one brings a stranger to that table, unless she isn't a stranger. The introductions began with rehearsed phrases, cold greetings, comments about recent business. No one touched the elephant in the room until Matteo decided to pull the curtain off once and for all. "Before anything else, you need to meet someone," he announced, his voice firm as steel. "This is Lara." Heads turned. "She's my sister." The impact of the word sister was almost physical. One of the representatives of a rival family coughed, choking. Another ran a hand over his chin, clearly uncomfortable. The oldest of them, Vincenzo Morelli, involved since the time of the original kidnapping, leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "Is this some kind of theater, Ravelli?" Matteo didn't back down. "No, this is what you failed to destroy." He placed his hand on the back of Lara's chair. "She is alive. She is here. And anything that happens to her from today onwards will be considered direct aggression, not only against me, but against all the families who signed that agreement 22 years ago." The silence that followed was thick. Morelli was the first to break it. "If she's alive, someone lied. Someone embezzled the payment. Someone profited from an unnecessary war." The words floated between them like knives. "Did you bring proof of what you're saying?" another asked. Matteo pulled out a folder and spread out on the table some of the documents Chiara had organized. Medical reports, old photos, descriptions of the cut on her wrist, cross-referenced with reports from the time of the kidnapping. Morelli picked up one of the photos, brought it close to his glasses, and for a second, Lara saw something resembling remorse pass through his eyes. "The cut is the same," he murmured. "The hand is the same." He slowly raised his eyes, meeting Lara's. "You shouldn't be here, girl." Lara felt anger rising hot. "But I am," she replied firmly, "and I wasn't the one who started this." There was a moment when Lara almost stood up, almost pointed her finger in their faces, almost unleashed her snatched childhood, the constant changes, the chronic fear of noises in the early morning. But Matteo placed his hand on her shoulder, light but firm, as if to say without words, "Choose your battles." He took the floor again. "Someone within our families made a deal on the side with my sister's life," he declared. "Maybe it was people who are already dead. Maybe not. But I'm not here to apologize or to relive old massacres. I'm here to make it clear that if another message comes in the form of a photo, an explosion, or a message involving her or her sister, I will tear down any agreement I still have in place." The message wasn't an empty threat. It was a pact of mutual destruction, if necessary. At the end of the meeting, no miraculous peace was signed. It wasn't that kind of story. What happened was something more subtle, and perhaps more powerful. Recognition. They left knowing that the girl with the cut wrist was no longer a legend, no longer a rumor, no longer a story used to justify violence. She was a woman sitting at the table, with a firm gaze, an exposed scar, a name, and a voice. And, in that world of men who build empires on the silence of others, this changed the game. Matteo left the club with the heavy posture of someone carrying both victory and threat on his shoulders. In the car, the silence between him and Lara was thick, but not hostile. "You held your gaze," he finally said. "I thought you were going to faint," she replied. "If you had fainted, they would have smelled the fear," she shrugged. "I am afraid. What I no longer have is the will to live running from it." The following weeks were strangely calm on the surface, which in the Mafia world is never just calm. It's recalibration. Some deals were discreetly undone, routes realigned, people who had accumulated too much power without an official name were retired or sent away. Matteo began to talk, with Chiara and a few trusted associates, about reducing more violent operations, investing more heavily in legalized fronts, diversifying in a way that didn't depend so much on fear. "It's not because of you," he told Lara one night on the balcony, while Miami shone below like a sea of artificial lights. "It's because of all of us. But you were the push." She rested her elbow on the railing, watching the city's reflection in his eyes. "Nobody changes an empire because of a scar," she teased. He smiled slightly. "Maybe not, but sometimes it's the scar that reminds us of what's worth saving." At home, the changes were also visible. Julia was adapting to the new rhythm, to the therapeutic school, to the sensory room, to the routines that had once brought tears and were now becoming increasingly predictable. She learned to walk through the garden without being startled by unfamiliar voices, to recognize the sound of Matteo's footsteps in the hallway, and to identify when the house was having a good day or a bad day. "It's good today," she would say when the guards spoke more quietly, and Clara softly whistled an old song in the kitchen. "Not today," he would murmur when the phone rang more often, and the doors remained more closed. Lara observed everything with a mixture of gratitude and fear. It was impossible to deny that, in that distorted context, her sister had gained more stability than ever before. But the question persisted: at what price? At the official reopening of Portobello, months later, the evening felt like a new beginning. The restaurant looked the same as before: white tablecloths, neatly arranged glasses, the smell of truffles, but the atmosphere was different. Part of the old clientele had disappeared, replaced by a public that came less for secrecy and more for the food. Matteo arrived early, discreetly greeted the staff, and left Lara in charge of the dining room. She wore her uniform with a different demeanor now. She was no longer just the waitress trying not to make mistakes. She was the woman whose life had been taken away, given back, and who now used that space as part of a new chapter. A few knew who she was. Most didn't, and that was okay. While coordinating reservations and giving instructions, she felt her pulse throb slightly, no longer as a warning of imminent danger, but as a reminder of everything that had brought her there. Late in the evening, as the activity subsided and the staff began to dismantle the hall, Matteo entered through the back door, just like the first time she had truly noticed his presence. Only now, his gaze wasn't searching for a scar to solve an old enigma. It was searching for the certainty that she was still there, whole, despite everything. "So?" he asked, looking around. "Survived the first day as the owner of half this mess?" She laughed wearily. "I survived. But I still think you came out ahead." He raised an eyebrow. "Me?" She shrugged. "You gained someone who will nag you every time you try to solve problems with a gun instead of a contract." He sighed theatrically. "I should have left you alone in another state." They both knew it was a lie. That night, back at the mansion, after Julia had slept, exhausted and peaceful, Lara sat alone on the highest balcony of the house, feeling the warm wind on her face. The city shimmered in the distance, and for a moment, she could see her own story as if it were one of those series Julia sometimes watched on a loop, episodes where everything went wrong until, suddenly, a forgotten detail in a corner of the scene became the key to everything. He raised his wrist, observing the scar in the dim light. For years, it had been just a mark of pain, a reminder of everything that had been taken away. Now, it was also something else, a point of connection, a sign that, however crooked the line had been, she had found someone willing to lock the world outside if necessary to keep her alive. She knew that the peace she experienced wasn't true peace. It was a truce. She knew that out there were people who still couldn't accept the fact that the girl with the cut wrist had returned and was now sitting at the decision-making table. She knew that, if one day everything collapsed, perhaps the same corridors that now echoed with protected footsteps would once again hear shouts and hurried orders. But she also knew that, if that happened, she would no longer be that child dragged away in the middle of the night without understanding. She would be a woman who chose where she wanted to be, the faces she was willing to fight for, the boundaries she wouldn't let anyone cross. He rested his scar against the cold handrail, took a deep breath, and for the first time since Matteo shouted, "Get out now!" in Portobello, he felt something akin to calm. Not because the danger was over, but because, finally, She had stopped running from her own name. When she left the balcony and turned off the lights, the hallway was silent. Matteo passed by in the distance, speaking softly to Chiara about some course correction, some negotiation that would avoid more bloodshed. He looked up for a second, and she saw in that tired gaze the same recognition from the first night, but without shock, without panic, just certainty. She responded with a minimal nod, and the two walked in opposite directions down the hallway, each carrying their own part of the war. But now, for the first time, in the same house, on the same side. Outside, the city remained noisy, full of people who would never know that the future of some streets had changed because of an old cut on the wrist of a woman who only wanted to pay her bills in peace. Inside, however, a line had been drawn, and like it or not, it was on that line that their story would continue to be written. Summer arrived slowly on the Miami coast, carrying a different, lighter warmth, as if the city had momentarily forgotten the silent wars that stitch its streets together. Lara walked along the wooden deck of the Ravelli mansion, watching Giulia play with a therapist in the lower garden, where the trees filtered the sun in golden patches. The scar on her wrist no longer throbbed as a warning. Now it was just a memory. Matteo appeared at the door, leaning against the frame, observing without interrupting. He no longer needed to announce his presence. The whole house recognized his footsteps, and somehow Lara did too. There, in that warm, late afternoon, there was no power, no threat, no territory, only two people who had survived the worst and learned to exist in the same space without fear. In the months following the meeting with the families, the silence that followed was not the dangerous silence of before, but the calculated silence of those who understand that certain limits can no longer be tested without serious consequences. The threatening photo never reappeared. The patrols continued. The guards remained vigilant. The businesses were reconfigured. But for the first time, there was order. Matteo reduced violent operations, transferred people, consolidated agreements, and closed doors that should have been closed decades ago. Lara, in turn, officially took over Portobello, transforming the restaurant into something more transparent, less armed from the inside out. Gradually, the community began to notice the change. They couldn't explain why, but they knew that the Ravelli surname no longer carried the same weight as before, not in a destructive way. Giulia blossomed during that time. From a withdrawn girl, frightened by unpredictable environments, she began to create routines, recognize faces, and embrace subtle changes. She felt safe there, and that in itself was something enormous. Lara watched her sister run through the garden with her new backpack from therapeutic school, and each small advance was a victory against a past that tried to erase them. There were difficult days, relapses, sleepless nights, but there was always structure. Matteo ensured that nothing was lacking, not as payment for guilt, but as a conscious decision to protect something that he finally understood mattered more than his own name. And Lara, even suspicious of so many gestures at the beginning, discovered that trusting was not about giving in, but about recognizing when someone truly decides to stay. One night, sitting on the balcony looking at the dark sea, Matteo finally broke a silence that had lasted longer than any conversation. "When I saw you that night in Portobello, I thought I was seeing a ghost," he confessed, his voice low, firm, without the weight of before. Lara rested her arms on the railing, feeling the warm wind on her face. "I also thought my life would end there," she replied, without fear. A half smile appeared on his lips. "And no, start properly maybe." She turned her face to him, analyzing every part of this new Matteo. Not the boss, not the predator, but the man who still carried his own scars, invisible to the eye, but as real as hers. And in that instant, she understood that both of them were, in some way, rebuilding. The future, no one there dared to predict. The city would remain a city, full of secrets, bargains, risks, shadows. War could return. Someone could unearth the past again. New enemies could emerge. But for the first time, Lara didn't feel like she was living on the edge of an abyss. The scar on her wrist wasn't a sentence. It was a symbol of survival, of return, of origin, and surprisingly, of choice. And as she closed the balcony door that night, listening to Giulia laugh somewhere in the house, she understood something simple. No matter how much darkness remained around her, she wasn't alone. Matteo passed by in the hallway, only gave a brief nod, a small gesture but full of promise, and continued on his way. Lara smiled to herself. Some stories don't end with peace. They end with belonging. And for her, that was enough. If you've made it this far, it means this story really got to you. And now I want to know what affected you the most. Was it his scream in the restaurant? The moment the scar changed their destinies? The tension at the family table? Or the silent epilogue that speaks louder than any words? Comment below which scene froze you. And also comment on where you're watching this story from. I want to see this map light up. Brazil, Portugal, USA, Japan, Angola. The more places, the stronger this community becomes. And do me a favor, and yourself, reply to the comment made by someone before you. Yes, interact. Shadow Hearts grows when you talk to each other, exchange theories, discuss characters, debate moral choices, and share how each plot twist resonated with you. Here, every comment becomes part of the universe. It is clear. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on notifications, because every new video arrives with impact, plot twists, tension, and the kind of emotion that only Shadow Hearts delivers. Don't put it off. If you blink, you'll miss a story that could become your favorite. Now it's your turn. Comment. Say where you're listening from. Share your theory. Talk about who earned your respect and what moment is still echoing in your mind. See you in the comments. And in the next video, because here, silence is never just silence.